Matthew Cole stepped out of his luxurious black SUV, the door closing with a soft thud that echoed in the crisp morning air. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket, its fabric smooth against his skin, and glanced at the gleaming glass facade of the hospital. The towering structure loomed over him, a stark contrast to the world of steel and concrete that he usually dominated. As he strode toward the entrance, he couldn't shake the gnawing anxiety gnawing at him. He checked his watch, 10 minutes until his scheduled checkup, but he couldn't help but think of the high-stakes business meeting scheduled for later that day. Matthew's mind raced with thoughts of contracts and negotiations, his empire built on the very foundations he was about to inspect. His father had taught him that success in construction was about more than just bricks and mortar. It was about relationships and timing. But as he entered the hospital lobby, he felt an unsettling disconnection from the world he had so meticulously crafted. He hadn't seen his family in years, the guilt of that absence hanging over him like a dark cloud. A quick visit to the doctor felt like a distraction from the reality of his life, a life he had chosen but often questioned. The lobby buzzed with the low hum of conversations and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Matthew moved through the throng, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. He caught snippets of conversations about health updates, loved ones, and laughter, all things that felt distant to him. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed with anyone, let alone shared a meal with family. The familiar pang of regret struck him as he thought of his younger sister, Sarah, who had vanished years ago. The memories of their childhood adventures felt like a fading photograph, the colors blurring with time. As Matthew reached the reception desk, he noticed a nurse moving swiftly through the lobby. She had an air of urgency about her, her brow furrowed, and her dark hair pulled back into a tight bun. Something about her struck him as familiar, though he couldn't place it. He watched as she paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the crowd before locking onto him. There was something in her eyes, a mix of concern and determination, that made him pause. "Mr. Cole," she called, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. He turned, curiosity piqued. The nurse rushed toward him, her scrubs slightly wrinkled, as if she had been running from one emergency to another. "Please, don't go to your meeting," she implored, her eyes wide with urgency. The world around him faded, and for a moment, it felt as if they were the only two people in existence. "Excuse me?" Matthew replied, his brow knitting together in confusion. "What do you mean?" I know this sounds crazy, but you need to trust me. There's going to be a fire at the venue." "You shouldn't go," she said, her voice low but insistent. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy with an unexplainable tension. Matthew blinked, processing her unexpected warning. "How do you know this? Are you sure?" "I can't explain right now," she said, glancing around nervously, as if afraid someone might overhear. "But please, I've seen things, and I just know you shouldn't go. Not today." He hesitated, caught between the instinct to dismiss her as another overzealous hospital employee and a strange urge to trust her. The reminder of his meeting loomed in his mind, the contracts and numbers swirling in an endless loop. Yet, there was something in her eyes, an earnestness that stirred a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a flicker of connection that felt almost familial. "Listen," he said, his voice steadying despite the chaos of thoughts in his mind. "I have a very important meeting scheduled. I can't just not show up. Mr. Cole, think about it. What's more important, your life or a meeting?" she pressed, her voice rising slightly. "I'm begging you, please stay here and talk to me." The urgency in her tone began to chip away at his resolve. He glanced at his watch again, the ticking seconds echoing in his ears. "What's your name?" he asked, suddenly intrigued. "Sarah," she replied, her expression softening for just a moment. "Sarah Thompson." The name resonated within him, stirring something deep and long buried. He had once had a sister named Sarah, a sister who had disappeared in the midst of family turmoil. The memories were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle he had long since given up trying to assemble. "Sarah," he repeated, testing the name on his lips. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to listen," she said, her eyes pleading. "I want you to be safe. Please, Just stay with me for a while. We can talk. I need you to understand. Matthew felt a strange compulsion to trust her, a connection that he couldn't quite articulate. Against his better judgment, he nodded slowly, the weight of his decision settling over him. All right, he said, his voice firming. Let's talk. As they moved away from the reception area, Matthew felt a curious mix of emotions swirling within him: confusion, intrigue, and a strange sense of hope. They found a quiet corner of the hospital lobby, away from the bustling crowd, and sat down on a pair of plastic chairs that squeaked under their weight. "Why are you so concerned about me?" Matthew asked, studying her face for any sign of deception. "You don't even know me." "I know more than you think," Sarah replied, her voice low. "I've followed your career from afar. I've seen the man you've become, the empire you've built, but I also know what you've lost." Matthew's heart raced. "What do you mean by that?" he pressed, leaning in. "I know about your family," she continued, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "About your sister who disappeared. I've been trying to find you for years, Matthew. I never forgot you." His breath caught in his throat. You're my sister?" The words felt foreign, as if they belonged to another life entirely. "Matthew, she started. But before she could finish, the hospital's intercom crackled to life, announcing a fire drill. The calm atmosphere shifted instantly, and Matthew's heart raced as he realized how quick the world could change. "Stay here," he said abruptly, standing up. "I'll be right back." He moved toward the nearest exit, his mind racing with questions and the unshakable feeling that something monumental was about to unfold. The nurse, his sister, was still sitting in the chair, her expression a mix of worry and resolve. He turned back to look at her, the weight of her presence grounding him, and nodded. "Wait for me," he instructed, and as he pushed through the doors, he could feel the tremors of his life shifting, the past colliding with the present in ways he had never imagined. Whatever was coming, he knew one thing for certain. He needed to understand what Sarah knew, and how it tied into the life he had built, a life that was now intertwined with the sister he thought he had lost forever. Matthew and Sarah settled into a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, the hum of conversation and the clatter of trays a distant background to their unfolding story. Matthew's sharp blue eyes surveyed the bustling space, but his mind was focused entirely on the woman sitting across from him. He felt a strange connection to her, one that tugged at the corners of his memory, but he couldn't quite grasp why. As Sarah fiddled with her fork, her gaze drifted to the window, where the sun streamed in, illuminating her features. He could see the warmth of her auburn hair catching the light, her green eyes reflecting a depth of emotion that intrigued him. "Matthew," she began hesitantly, "I've been following your career for a while now. Your work, it's impressive." Her voice, though soft, carried an undeniable weight. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that," he replied, a flicker of curiosity igniting within him. "But you seem to know a lot about me. I'd love to know more about you." She shook her head slightly, a hint of sadness shadowing her features. "There's not much to tell. I'm just a nurse, doing my job. I've always admired what you've accomplished, but—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, as if wrestling with a hidden truth. "Just a nurse?" Matthew echoed, leaning forward. "That's an incredibly important job. You help people every day. You save lives." Her lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes remained distant. "I try, but sometimes I feel like I'm not doing enough." Matthew's heart ached at the vulnerability she exuded. "Seems to me you're doing more than most. You saved my life today. I should be thanking you." Sarah's eyes flickered with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something unspoken. "I just had a feeling, you know? Something wasn't right about that meeting. I couldn't let you go." He studied her, trying to discern the layers of her emotions. "You didn't know what was going to happen, did you? How could you?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I don't know, Matthew. I felt a rush of fear when I saw you. It was like I was pulled to you, and the thought of you being in danger made my heart race." Before he could respond, the loud blaring of an alarm pierced through the cafeteria, causing heads to turn and conversations to halt. The overhead speakers crackled to life, announcing an emergency situation. "Attention, please. There is a fire in the building. Evacuate immediately." Panic surged through the room as people scrambled to their feet, chairs scraping against the floor. Matthew's heart raced not just from the alarm, but from the chilling realization that the fire was at the venue of his meeting. He stood abruptly, instinctively reaching for Sarah's hand. "Come on, we need to get out of here," he urged, leading her towards the exit. As they pushed through the throng of panicked hospital staff and visitors, Matthew couldn't shake the feeling of dread. He had almost walked into that inferno, and Sarah had intervened just in time. Once outside, they were met with a scene of chaos. Emergency vehicles, their lights flashing, crowded the street, and thick plumes of smoke billowed into the sky, darkening the horizon. "Matthew!" Sarah shouted over the noise, her grip tightening around his hand. "You're safe now. You're okay." He turned to her, his breath coming in quick gasps. "You saved me. You really saved me." Her expression shifted, a mixture of relief and something deeper playing across her features. "I didn't want to lose you. I knew I had to do something." Matthew's mind raced, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions and the magnitude of what had just happened. "But how did you know? It's almost like you had a premonition." "I don't know how to explain it," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. I felt it in my bones, like I was meant to stop you from going." He watched the flames licking up into the sky, a dark omen of the destruction that could have taken his life. "This is unbelievable." He looked back at her, the weight of their connection settling in. "You're more than just a nurse, aren't you? There's something about you that feels familiar." Sarah's eyes widened, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of recognition in her gaze. "Matthew, Before she could finish, a fire truck roared past them, its sirens wailing. Matthew's mind was clouded with confusion, fear, and an odd sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite put his finger on. He had never believed in fate or destiny, but the events of the day were pushing him to reconsider. "Let's find somewhere safe to sit," he suggested, his voice steadying as he pulled her toward a nearby bench. They settled down, the adrenaline of the evacuation slowly ebbing away. "Do you remember anything from your childhood?" Sarah asked suddenly, her tone shifting. "Anything that might connect us?" He frowned, memories swirling in his mind like scattered leaves. "I remember bits and pieces. I had a sister, but he paused, the weight of the words heavy on his tongue. "She disappeared." "Matthew, Sarah started, her voice breaking. "I think I might be that sister." His heart stuttered at her revelation. "What do you mean?" "I was taken after everything happened. I grew up in foster care, and I lost track of my family. But I've been searching for you for years. I never stopped looking." Matthew felt a rush of emotions wash over him. Hope, disbelief, and a deep-seated yearning he had buried for so long. "You're my sister? But how? I thought you were gone forever." "I was," she said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "But I always felt a part of me was missing. When I saw you today, I knew it was you." The realization hit him like a tidal wave. All the pieces began to fall into place. The inexplicable connection, the urgency she had shown. "What happened to our family?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze shifted to the ground, and for a moment, the weight of their shared past hung heavy in the air. "There's so much to tell, but first, we need to be safe. You were in danger today because of something bigger than us." "Bigger than us?" he echoed, feeling the chill of her words. "What do you mean?" "I can't explain everything right now," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I promise you, I will tell you everything. We need to figure out what happened to us, to our family." As they sat there, the distant sirens fading into the background, Matthew felt an overwhelming sense of resolve. Together, they would uncover the truth. They would confront the past that had torn them apart and build a bridge to the future. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, a chance for healing, for understanding, and for the family he had thought was lost forever. Matthew returned to the hospital the next day, an undercurrent of urgency propelling him forward. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air as he made his way through the busy corridors, his mind racing with questions. How had Sarah known about the fire? It was a question that gnawed at him, digging deep into the guilt and confusion that had been his constant companions since he had lost contact with his family years ago. He spotted her in the same corner of the cafeteria where they had spoken before, but this time, she seemed different, her brows furrowed, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. "Sarah," Matthew called out as he approached, his heart hammering in his chest. She looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. But there was a flicker of something darker beneath the surface, anxiety or perhaps fear. "Matthew," she replied, her voice a mix of relief and apprehension. "I didn't expect to see you here so soon." "I needed to talk to you," he said, taking a seat across from her. "About yesterday. How did you know about the fire?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the floor. I had a feeling," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A premonition, I guess you could say." "A premonition?" Matthew echoed, his skepticism rising. "That's a strong word, Sarah. What do you mean?" "I don't know how to explain it," she said, her hands clasping tightly together. "It's been happening to me for years. Sometimes I just sense things, like something bad is going to happen. I had a strong feeling about your meeting." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "But it's not just about you, Matthew. It's connected to our family." Matthew's heart skipped a beat. "Our family? What do you know about our family?" "Things that were buried," Sarah replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Things I've pieced together over the years. I've been trying to understand what happened to us." He leaned in closer, his curiosity piqued. "What happened to us, Sarah?" She took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "When we were kids, our lives were complicated. Our parents were involved in something dangerous, and it led to their downfall. I know it sounds crazy, but I believe whatever it was, it affected us both in ways we can't even begin to fathom." "Complicated how?" Matthew pressed, his mind racing with the implications of her words. He had long buried the memories of his childhood, memories that felt more like fragments of a distant dream than reality. "I don't remember much." "That's likely by design," Sarah said, her voice firming. "Our family had secrets, Matthew, dark ones. I was taken away after everything happened. I don't think our parents wanted to lose us, but they didn't know how to protect us either." Matthew's heart ached as he listened to her. "You were taken away? You mean you were adopted?" "Yes," she nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "After the fire that destroyed our home, I was placed in foster care. I never really found a family that felt like home. I spent years trying to find you, but it was like looking for a ghost." He leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "I had no idea. I thought I was the only one left." "You weren't alone," Sarah said, her voice softening. "I've always felt a connection to you, even when I didn't know who you were. I've carried the burden of our past for so long, and I just need you to understand that I'm here now. We can figure this out together." "Together," he echoed, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. "If what you're saying is true, there are so many questions. I don't even know where to begin." "Start with what you remember," she encouraged, leaning in, her eyes earnest. "Anything at all. It might help us piece together the past." Matthew hesitated, his memories swirling like a whirlwind. "I remember bits and pieces. The house, it was big, old. I remember laughter, and then chaos." He paused, his throat tightening. "I remember the fire. I remember the sirens, the screams. But everything after that is just a blur." Sarah nodded, her expression sympathetic. "It's okay. We can figure it out. But you need to trust me. I wouldn't have warned you if I didn't care. There's something bigger at play here, something that connects our past to your present." "Bigger?" he questioned, the word hanging heavy in the air. "What do you mean?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, frustration creeping into her voice. "But I think it's connected to our family's history. There are things that happened that were never resolved. Secrets that may still threaten us." "Threaten us?" The word sent a shiver down his spine. "Yes," she affirmed, her eyes fierce. I sensed danger when I saw you at the hospital. It's like a shadow that's been following us, and I don't know how to make it stop." Matthew swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. He felt the walls of his carefully constructed life beginning to crumble, exposing the raw vulnerability he had buried beneath layers of success and wealth. "You really believe that whatever happened back then is still affecting us now?" "I do," Sarah said, her voice steady. "And I think it's time we uncover the truth." He leaned back, absorbing everything she had said. The pieces of his life that had once felt so disconnected now began to weave together into a tapestry of shared history and unresolved pain. What if we're digging up things that are better left buried? She reached across the table, her hand resting gently over his. "We can't live in fear of the past, Matthew. It's time to confront it. Together." The sincerity in her eyes ignited something within him, a flicker of hope amidst the shadows of doubt. "All right," he said, determination flooding his voice. "Let's uncover the truth. But where do we start?" "Let's start by talking to people who knew our family," Sarah suggested. "There might be someone who can help us piece together the story. Maybe even someone who knows what happened to you after the fire." Matthew nodded, feeling the weight of his decision settle in his chest. It was a daunting task, but for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of purpose. "Let's do it. I'm ready to find out the truth about my family, about you." As they sat together in the cafeteria, two lost souls bound by blood and circumstance, the world outside continued its relentless pace. But within that moment, they forged a connection that could withstand the storms of their past, a bond that would guide them forward into the uncharted territory of their shared history. And as they began to plan their next steps, Matthew knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't face the unknown alone. Matthew sat across from Sarah in the hospital cafeteria, his heart pounding as he tried to process everything she had just revealed. The chaotic sounds of the hospital faded into the background, replaced by the weight of their conversation. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on his sister's face, searching for clues in her expression, trying to reconcile the past he thought he had buried with the woman sitting before him. "Adopted?" he finally managed to ask, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. "But why? What happened after that day?" Sarah's expression shifted, a mixture of sadness and resolve crossing her features. "After the fire, after everything fell apart, I was placed in foster care. I was so young, Matthew. I barely remember the house, or mom and dad. They told me I was lucky to find a family that wanted me. But I never stopped wondering about you." Matthew felt a tightness in his chest, as if the air had been sucked from the room. Memories of their childhood, long buried beneath the weight of his success and the facade of his billionaire lifestyle, started to resurface. He could almost hear the echoes of laughter in their old home, the warmth of shared moments that had been stripped away from him. "All these years," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I thought you were gone. I never knew. I didn't even know if you were alive." "I searched for you," Sarah replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I asked every foster family I was with if they knew where you were. I even hired a private investigator when I was older, but he couldn't find anything. It was like you had vanished." A silence hung between them, heavy and poignant. Matthew's mind raced as he tried to fathom the implications of her words. "You've been looking for me all this time. Why didn't you reach out sooner?" Sarah shifted in her seat, her hands nervously clasped in her lap. "I was scared. I thought maybe you wouldn't want to see me. Or worse, that you wouldn't remember me at all." Matthew's heart ached with empathy. He could see the pain etched on her face, the years of searching and longing reflected in her eyes. "I would have wanted to find you, Sarah. I would have done anything to bring you back." "I know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I felt a connection to you, even when I was alone. I could never explain it. It was like a piece of my heart was missing." The weight of their shared history pressed down on him, and Matthew struggled to find the right words. "What do you remember about our family? About the day everything changed?" Sarah's gaze drifted to the floor, as if she were sifting through her memories. "I remember bits and pieces. I remember laughter and games, and you always looking out for me. But there are shadows too, whispers of arguments, the smell of smoke. I remember feeling scared, and then nothing. Matthew clenched his fists, battling the urge to protect her from the harsh realities of their past. The fire, it was supposed to be a simple accident, but it changed everything. I lost my parents that day, and I lost you too. I didn't know, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I tried to piece it together from what I was told, but I was too young. I thought they had abandoned me. Matthew shook his head, the memories flooding back with a vengeance. They loved us, Sarah. They would have done anything for us. But that day, it felt like everything fell apart. But why didn't anyone tell me? Sarah's eyes sparkled with unshed tears. I had to piece together my life without knowing the truth, because it was easier for them to forget, Matthew said bitterly. They thought it would protect us, protect me. But it only left me feeling lost and alone in a world of wealth and success that meant nothing without family. Sarah reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. You're not alone anymore, Matthew. We can face this together. We can find out what really happened. He looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. The thought of uncovering the truth about their family was both terrifying and exhilarating. But where do we even start? There's so much to uncover. I don't know, she admitted, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. But we have to try. If there's something out there, we owe it to ourselves to find it. Matthew nodded, the fire of determination igniting within him. You're right. We need to know. I want to understand what happened to us, to our family. I want to know why we were torn apart. As they shared this moment of resolve, Matthew couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. After years of isolation, perhaps this was the beginning of something new. Their connection felt as if it had been waiting in the shadows, ready to emerge into the light. Sarah, he said, his voice firm, let's promise to be honest with each other. No more secrets. We'll face everything together. She smiled through her tears, a fragile yet radiant expression. I promise, Matthew. No more hiding. Just then, the cafeteria doors swung open, and a group of nurses entered, their laughter echoing through the room. The mundane sounds of life continued around them, but for Matthew and Sarah, the world had shifted. They were no longer just lost souls. They were siblings reunited, bound by a shared past and a newfound purpose. Are you ready for this? Matthew asked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Sarah squeezed his hand, her grip reassuring. More than ever, we're in this together. As they prepared to leave the cafeteria, Matthew felt a surge of determination. The journey ahead would not be easy, but they would face it together. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of hope. They were on the brink of discovering the truth, one that had been buried for far too long. As they exited the hospital, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light on the pavement. In that moment, Matthew realized that no matter what lay ahead, he would not face it alone. He had found his sister, and together, they would uncover the secrets of their past. Matthew and Sarah stood in the remnants of their childhood home, a place that had once echoed with laughter and warmth but now felt more like a haunting memory. The air was thick with dust, and the sun cast a dim light through the cracked windows, illuminating the forgotten treasures of their past. They had decided to sift through the old boxes piled in the corner of the living room, hoping to uncover pieces of their family history that had long been buried. Do you remember this? Matthew asked as he lifted a faded stuffed bear from one of the boxes. It was matted and worn, its once bright colors now dull. He could almost hear the echoes of Sarah's laughter as she clutched it tightly during their childhood adventures. Sarah smiled wistfully, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I always took it everywhere, she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought it would keep me safe. Matthew placed the bear back down, his heart tightening. He could feel the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. We were so innocent then. It's hard to believe everything changed so quickly. As they continued to rummage through the boxes, they found old photographs, snapshots of family vacations, birthday parties, and holiday gatherings. Each image was a reminder of the life they had once shared. Matthew held up a picture of their parents, vibrant and happy, arms wrapped around each other, with young Matthew and Sarah beaming in front of them. Look at us, he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. We were so happy. Until everything fell apart, Sarah added, her tone shifting to one of sorrow. She reached out to touch the photograph, her fingers brushing against their mother's face. I wish I could remember more. I wish I could too, Matthew replied, but it's all so fuzzy. I remember the good times, but the bad, it's like a fog. They continued to search, unearthing letters and mementos that spoke of a family torn apart. A sense of urgency filled the air as each discovery seemed to unravel another thread of their shared past. Finally, Sarah stumbled upon an envelope tucked at the bottom of the box. Matthew, look at this, she called out, her voice suddenly filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Matthew stepped over, peering over her shoulder as she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, its paper yellowed with age. The handwriting was familiar, yet distant. It was their mother's. Can you read it? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. With a deep breath, Matthew unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. My dearest children, he started, his voice quavering. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to guide you. He paused, the weight of the words sinking in. I'm so sorry for what happened. I never wanted to hurt you. You were supposed to be together, but I was powerless to protect you. Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as she listened, the pain of their past rushing back. What does it say? She urged, her voice breaking. Matthew continued, there are things I can't explain, things I wish I could. I wanted to keep you safe, but sometimes life doesn't give us that choice. He could feel his own emotions surfacing, the guilt and sorrow mixing with the longing for the family they had lost. The letter went on, detailing their mother's regrets and her hope that they would one day find each other again. I always thought Sarah would come to live with you after the tragedy, Matthew, he read, his voice thick with emotion. But when she disappeared, I lost everything. Promise me you'll look for her, wherever she may be. Why didn't I know this? Matthew choked out, his heart aching for the sister he had lost. Why didn't anyone tell me? I don't know, Sarah replied, wiping her tears. It feels like we were both kept in the dark, like the world wanted to erase us. As they shared the moment, a mixture of confusion and anger began to boil within Matthew. We deserve to know the truth. Why did they have to keep us apart? Just then, they heard the crunch of gravel underfoot. Both siblings turned to see a figure approaching from the yard, a stranger with an air of authority. He was tall, with a rugged face that spoke of years spent unearthing secrets, and his eyes seemed to hold a depth of knowledge that piqued Matthew's curiosity. Excuse me, the stranger called out, stopping just beyond the threshold of the house. I couldn't help but notice you two here. Are you Matthew and Sarah Cole? Matthew felt a surge of protectiveness as he stepped slightly in front of Sarah, instinctively positioning himself between her and the stranger. Who are you? What do you want? The man raised his hands in a placating gesture. My name is Mark. I'm a private investigator. I've been looking for you both. Why? Matthew's tone was sharp, distrustful. Mark took a step closer, his expression earnest. Because I have information about your family, about your parents' death. It's important that you hear this. Matthew exchanged a glance with Sarah, uncertainty weaving between them. What do you know? He demanded, his heart racing. I know about the fire, about the tragedy that split your family apart. But there's more to it than you realize. Your parents didn't just die in an accident. They were murdered, Mark said, his voice low and intense. The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, all Matthew could do was stare. Murdered? By whom? Mark hesitated, and for a fraction of a second, Matthew feared the answer might shatter whatever fragile bond they were beginning to rebuild. I can't say much without proof, but there are connections to your family's past that extend into some dangerous territory. Powerful people who wanted to erase your family for good. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What do you mean? Matthew's mind raced with possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Are you saying someone did this on purpose? I believe so, Mark replied, his tone steady. And I think the fire at the meeting was part of a larger plan. They wanted to eliminate anyone connected to your family, and that includes you, Matthew. Shocked silence enveloped them, the gravity of the revelations sinking in. Matthew's heart pounded in his chest as he exchanged a glance with Sarah. They had only just begun to rediscover each other, and now they were thrust into a web of danger and deceit that threatened to pull them apart once more. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she looked up at her brother, seeking reassurance. Matthew took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "We figure this out together, whatever it takes." Mark nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "That's the spirit. But be careful. You're not just dealing with your past. You're facing a present that wants to keep you both from uncovering the truth." As they stood together in the shadow of their childhood home, Matthew felt a fierce determination rising within him. He would protect Sarah at all costs, even if it meant confronting the demons of their past and the threats of their present. They were siblings reunited after so long, and he wouldn't let anything tear them apart again. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Matthew and Sarah stood in the yard of their childhood home, the air thick with a mix of nostalgia and dread. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced against the remnants of their past. It was surreal, both comforting and haunting, as they faced the crumbling structure that had once been a sanctuary. Just moments ago, a stranger had approached them, his demeanor serious and guarded, introducing himself as Mark, a private investigator. With a furrowed brow and an intensity in his voice, he claimed to have information that could change everything. "Matthew Cole and Sarah Thompson," he stated, his tone low but urgent. "I've been looking for both of you. There's something you need to know about your family. Something dark." Matthew exchanged a glance with Sarah, a silent communication that spoke volumes. He felt a knot form in his stomach. The weight of their past had been heavy enough already. He could only imagine what Mark was about to reveal. "Let's sit," Sarah suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. They moved to the porch steps, the wood creaking under their weight. Mark joined them, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as if bracing himself for the storm he was about to unleash. "I've been digging into your family history for years," Mark began, his gaze shifting to the ground as if searching for the right words. "What I've found is unsettling." Matthew leaned forward, his heart racing. "Just tell us, what happened to our parents?" The question hung in the air, thick with anticipation. Mark took a deep breath, his expression grave. "Your parents were murdered. It was covered up as an accident, but I've gathered enough evidence to prove otherwise. It was orchestrated by someone close to you, someone who wanted to bury the truth." The words hit Matthew like a punch to the gut. He felt the world tilt beneath him as he processed the revelation. Sarah's hand trembled as she clutched the porch railing, her face pale. "Murdered? But why? Who would do something like that?" "That's what I'm trying to find out," Mark replied. "But I have a theory. Your family had enemies, and those enemies are tied to a powerful business rival of Matthew's. Someone who would do anything to eliminate anyone who could stand in their way." Matthew's mind raced. The business world was ruthless, and he'd made plenty of enemies along the way. But to think that someone would go this far, to eliminate his family to get to him, was beyond comprehension. "You mean someone is still out there, targeting us?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," Mark confirmed, his eyes locking onto Matthew's. "The fire at your meeting wasn't just a coincidence. It was a warning. They know you're looking into your past, and they won't stop until they silence you both." Sarah's breath quickened, panic flickering in her eyes. "What do we do? How do we protect ourselves?" Mark's expression softened slightly. "First, you need to stay together. There's strength in numbers. And second, we need to dig deeper into this. I've gathered some leads, but I'll need your help to piece everything together." Matthew nodded, determination igniting within him. "What do you need us to do?" "We need to start by identifying your parents' last known associates," Mark explained. "There may be people in their circle who have information about what happened. They could also help us understand who might be behind this." As they spoke, Matthew's mind was racing with memories. He remembered his parents' friends, the gatherings they held, the laughter that filled the house. But as he sifted through those memories, a chilling realization set in. What if they're still out there? What if they know we're looking? "They might," Mark replied, his voice steady. "But that's why we need to be careful. We can't let them know we're onto them. Sarah looked between the two men, her brow furrowed with concern. And what about the fire? What if they try again? Matthew's heart ached at the thought. We'll be vigilant. I won't let anything happen to you, Sarah. You're my sister and I know, she interrupted, her voice strong despite her fear. But we need a plan. We can't just sit back and hope they won't come after us. Mark nodded in agreement. We can create a strategy. First, let's secure your current locations. I can set up surveillance, and we can arrange for safe places to meet. We need to be smart about this. All right, Matthew said, his resolve hardening. Let's do this. We're not going to let our past dictate our future. We're going to find out the truth, and we're going to make sure we're safe while doing it. As they discussed their next steps, an unspoken bond began to form between the three of them. They were united by a shared history, a tragedy that had torn them apart and now brought them together in a desperate fight for the truth. Matthew could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but alongside Sarah and Mark, he felt a flicker of hope. They were no longer alone. Where do we start? Sarah asked, her voice steady now, a fierce determination shining in her eyes. We start with the people who knew your parents best, Mark replied. We need to track down their old friends and business associates. They might have insights or pieces of information that could lead us to the truth. Let's go through the old photo albums, Matthew suggested. There might be names or faces we can recognize. Maybe someone is still around. They all nodded in agreement, and the three of them made their way back inside the house. The air felt heavy with anticipation, each step echoing the weight of their shared past. As they began to sift through the old boxes, Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of uncovering something monumental. With every photograph, every letter, they were peeling back layers of a life that had been hidden away for too long. Here, Sarah said, holding up a faded photograph of their family at a picnic, laughter frozen in time. I remember this day. It was one of the last times we were all together. Matthew took the photo, studying the faces of their parents, their smiles bright and carefree. They were happy, he murmured, a pang of longing in his chest. Do you think they knew what was coming? Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. I hope not, Matthew replied, though doubt gnawed at him. But we'll find out. We owe it to them, and to ourselves, to uncover the truth. As they delved deeper into their past, the shadows of their family's tragedy loomed large, but so did the promise of discovery. Together, they would face the darkness, united by blood and a shared resolve. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that made all the difference. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.